You're listening to the Cycling Podcast in association with Rapha, celebrating the sport and producing the finest cycling clothing since 2004.
Hello, my name is Lionel Birnie and I hope you're feeling hungry because this is another episode of Lunch with the Cycling Podcast. My guest in this show is Brian Holm, the Danish sports director with the Quick-Step Floors team. Holm is a former rider who almost died in a crash when he was a young professional. He's an ex-Danish national champion and winner of the Paris-Brussels one-day race, who spent 5 years with the Telekom team, riding as a domestique for Bjarne Riis when his fellow Dane won the Tour de France in 1996. Like Riis, Holm doped and he confessed. He's a cancer survivor, and as boss of the HTC-Columbia and then Quick-Step teams, he's become one of the most quotable sports directors in the convoy of team cars. He loves London, its music and fashion, and he counts the designer Sir Paul Smith among his friends. Holm was one of the best men at Mark Cavendish's wedding, and he's a politician too, having been elected to Copenhagen's council in 2013. In fact, he was re-elected last month by 168 votes. Recently I met Brian in London and took him for traditional pie and mash at Mother Mash in Ganton Street, just round the corner from Carnaby Street. Before we join Brian though, here's the latest news from the world of cycling. The Tour de Yorkshire route for 2018 has been confirmed. The 4-day men's race starts on May the 3rd with a stage 1 from Beverley to Doncaster. Stage 2 goes from Barnsley to Ilkley with a finish on the Cow and Calf, and stage 3 is from Richmond to Scarborough with the final leg from Halifax to Leeds. The 2-day women's race covers variations of the opening 2 stages. Mark Cavendish has already indicated he'd like to ride the men's race. Speaking of Cavendish, and remember that crash at the Tour de France in July? Well, Peter Sagan and the Bora Hansgrohe team have dropped their case against the UCI after Sagan's disqualification following that crash in the sprint finish at the end of stage 4 to Vittel. The case had been due to be heard by the Court of Arbitration for Sport on December the 5th, but the two parties have agreed to drop it and move on. In track cycling, the third round of the World Cup has been taking place in Milton in Canada. The New Zealanders had great success on the men's side, winning the team's pursuit and the team sprint. In the team sprint final, they beat the British team. Germany's Christina Vogel won the women's sprint, team sprint and keirin to win 3 medals. Katie Archibald almost matched that with a double. She won the points race and the Madison with Eleanor Dickinson. Canada had some success by winning the women's team pursuit, and the World Cup continues this weekend in Santiago in Chile. Back on the road, having raced as Française des Jeux or FDJeux.com since the team started in 1997, Mark Maddio's squad has a new name and sponsor. The insurance company Groupama will take over as title sponsor of Thibaut Pinot's team next year, and they'll be called Groupama FDJ. The 3-year deal boosts the annual budget by around a third to €20 million a year, it's been reported. Finally, this is not quite cycling news, but it's an important one for us here at the Cycling Podcast because next week we are launching the 2018 Friends of the Podcast programme. Check social media and our website thecyclingpodcast.com on Monday for details. We're very grateful to our principal sponsors Rapha and Science in Sport for their backing. We're also thankful to the other companies that have sponsored us at various times over the year, because without them we'd not be able to cover the sport the way we do. We've produced over 130 free episodes, including daily coverage of the 3 Grand Tours, plus the Cycling Podcast Feminin and Kilometre Zero. But in the modern media landscape, sponsorship doesn't cover all of the costs, and so those of you who've signed up as friends of the podcast have been absolutely vital to us. Just as we couldn't have done it without our sponsors, we couldn't have done it without you either. We produced 11 feature-length episodes for Friends of the Podcast, starting with the Lotto Soudal training camp back in January, covering the Lionel of Flanders, my trip to Belgium in the spring, Alexis Ryan's Tour of California diary, Richard's day in the Cannondale Drapat team car in the Alps at the Tour de France, plus a whole host of bonus episodes, including the never-to-be-forgotten Tour de France road trip, which has to be heard to be believed, I think. We hope you've enjoyed the depth and variety of that coverage because we have more special episodes planned for 2018. Now, although you get 11 episodes for your money, becoming a friend of the podcast is so much more important to us than just buying additional shows to listen to, because that funding enables us to continue to produce all of the free episodes that we do. Our audience has grown a lot this year, which is fantastic, and at the moment around 6 to 7% of you who are listening to this right now have chosen to support us by becoming a friend of the podcast, and we really thank you for that support. and we hope that when we put our 2018 programme on sale next week, you'll continue to choose to support us. And if you haven't signed up as a friend of the podcast before, perhaps consider doing so. You can listen to all of the back catalogue, 2015, 16 and 17, if you buy the bundle package, which will also be on sale with the 2018 programme. Anyway, thanks for listening to all that, and without further ado, let's join Brian Holm for lunch. Hello, Brian.
Hello, sir. Nice to see you. That's a cozy place here.
Well, Are you okay with traditional British food, pie and mash?
I love it. I just love it. I already ate English breakfast. I just love it. I could eat it 3 times a day, really. Yeah. I love it. Can't get enough. Normally at home I would never eat breakfast. I just never do it. But in Britain, I wake up 1 hour earlier just to have the breakfast.
Is this what you think of us over here? I mean, we're in one of the most sophisticated cities in the world, and what do you think of our cuisine?
Honestly, about food, I don't bother. I'm not like for cuisine stuff like that. I never really was into the food business. To be honest, I couldn't care less, But plain simple food like eggs and bacon for breakfast, that's the only thing I really care about. And then, to be honest, I like shortbread also.
Well, let's go and see what you make of pie and mash then.
Let's give it a try.
What are you going to go for, Brian?
Something with sausage, I think. I just have to check it. There's a big card here, isn't it? Sweet potatoes, a jam, traditional Irish mash with milk, butter, cheddar cheese, and spring onions. That's going to be my choice.
Very nice. Well, I'm going to go for a pie, I think, and I might go for the champ as well, or maybe the cold cannon.
Well, I didn't even know what was the pies. Oh, here.
So we've got sausages there, or pies down below there. So steak or minced beef, or you don't want vegetarian, I guess, do you? No.
Oh no. Not yet. Sausages or pies. Now I go for a pie. I changed my mind. Aberdeen Angus steak. Sound fine.
Well, we'll get those ordered up in a moment. What have you been up to this morning?
Actually, I was up a bit early because I was texting Paul Smith yesterday. Did have time for a coffee, and he said, I have a busy schedule, so all right. But end of the day, yesterday night he texted he would have a half an hour from 9 to 9:30, so I took a walk through London. It's very nice. I just love to walk around in London because you always find something new in London. I'm an old bricklayer. I just love to watch the old buildings. I mean, how many beautiful old buildings here. Sit down, drinking coffee, just watching the people passing by. A lot of different characters here in London. It's very nice to sit just watching people, and especially the old houses. All the architecture is just beautiful here. I really love it because I think in the past, there was better what you call craftsmanship. I mean, there was real bricklayers. Nowadays, everything they make look like the same concrete, grey. It's quite boring. Like I always say, it's end up like looking like a big American shopping mall, isn't it? But like the old buildings here, the history, I really love it.
So you were a bricklayer when you were what, like a teenager or in your early 20s?
I started education, and when I was like 17 years old, you go to school 3.5 years. You start working 6:30 in the morning out with the cold bricks. We could just go home. It was colder than minus 7 degrees. You sort of put alcohol in the concrete when you built, the bricks was all. I would still remember how cold the bricks was in the morning on your fingers. We was working down till minus 7, and then we could go home. But we always did it, when I was amateur, we'd work full time. I remember going to the school was 3.5 years, and because I did the Olympic, the worlds, always took like 1 week off. So the week you took off, you have to work longer end of the year, for the education. It was a good work, and the guy who was carrying the bricks, Albert, sometimes he looked after me. He sometimes let me go like a half an hour before. Normally we work from 6:30 in the morning till 4 o'clock. Sometimes he let me go like 3:30, 3 o'clock because, I would train like 140 kilometers in the afternoon. My son Albert, It's named after my own old colleague from I was a bricklayer.
So he was like the boss of the wherever you were working, was he?
He was probably old already then, but he was like he did carry our bricks, the concrete, when we was working. But he was sort of the boss. I think he never slept. He'd been at work every day. Like he would be there when we start working at 6:30. He would probably be there at work 5:30 in the morning, and it was a hard job. It was really a hard job. I remember when I was young professional, when I started working as a bricklayer, I made like 9 Danish crown an hour. It's bit more than €1 an hour. And it wasn't a lot of money those days, but I remember it was a hard job, especially in the winter when it was cold. And I also, when I was young professional, I always thought like, fuck, you won't make as a professional cyclist, I have to go back to Denmark and be a bricklayer. And if you think it's hard to be a cyclist, it's even harder to be a bricklayer. So,
what is it about bricklaying as well? Because it's a job that has to be done in a certain way. There's kind of, a meticulousness to it. You have to prepare everything properly, and then you're constructing something, and it grows before your eyes as a result of your labour. There's something quite symbolic about that, I think.
It's sort of pride for your job, also for your work. I'm still passing when I'm driving around in Copenhagen now with my kids, with my wife. They say, hey, look, Daddy, he built that house, like 100 years ago. They're going, yeah, wow, we heard that before, because I always pointed it out to my family what I built. But honestly, I'm really proud of it. And, when I was a young bricklayer in Denmark, they have to wear white clothing, white hat. I always did it, it had to be clean every Monday. It was clean when you came in. I was sort of the pride because I had some bricklayer homes because I was traveling. So and they didn't have the white clothing on, so I really complained. I called the boss, complain about the clothing, and he said it doesn't really matter, does it, with color of clothing that they're wearing? I said actually it does, because when you have the right clothing on, I think you give you some pride of your job also.
Quite a journey from laying bricks in Copenhagen to popping in for brunch with Paul Smith. How did you meet him?
So 2000, I was walking around, now 99 probably, I was walking with Bjarne Riis in Copenhagen, was watching some shoes, Paul Smith, and I said, I'm gonna buy them, and Bjarne said, Paul Smith, well, what's that? And I said, you never heard about Paul Smith? And of course, Bjarne, he's like, from the countryside of Denmark, he wouldn't know anything about clothing or fashion, Riis. So he said, no, he didn't heard about it, but I think he sort of knew the name. So he said, yeah, I think he wrote me a letter asking about a yellow jersey. And I said, and I hope you sent him one, didn't you? And Riis said, no, everybody asking me, I didn't. I said, you bloody dickhead, like, I get a jersey from Jan Ulrik or somebody else, send it to Paul Smith, and probably I put my business card or something with it, forgot about it. The year after, I was at Tour of Britain, last day in London, and somebody calling, and I didn't know the number, and I said, oh, maybe it's a commissary or something, so I better pick it up. And I said, yeah, Paul Smith. I thought somebody was joking, can you help me to get in, And I just went to check, and Paul Smith himself was standing waiting. Normally I would leave after the race, but he said, you got time for lunch tomorrow? And I think I better change my ticket, and we stayed. So now I go here once a year, I love London. I always go here like 2-3 days alone, walking around. I text him, Paul, he got time for like coffee sometime. He does, other times he don't, because he's busy, but he's a good man. I think he's one of the best things happened for cycling, because he's really a big fan of cycling. He follow.
I guess he kind of influenced Rapha in a way, in the sense that cycling clothing doesn't have to look terrible. Cycling clothing has really gone through a revolution in the last few years, and I think it's something probably Paul Smith would approve of.
I would say so, because in the past, when I was a kid, cycling was for the working class. Nowadays, it changed a lot, didn't it? It's like lawyers, bankers, everybody do cycling, you can have tattoos, you can have a beer. And I think like Paul Smith, he was one of the guys who really pushing cycling the right direction, because that's not many years ago. Actually, it is. I'm getting old, so stuff for me, like 25 years, 30 years isn't too long. But when I was a young professional, you was just allowed to go black bib shorts, white socks, everything was quite conservative sport, and quite boring probably. Then probably I think Castelli started with the color bib shorts. Early 80s, the colored shoes, cycling shoes, white, gold, blue, whatsoever. Still was probably just a working class sport. And then the Rapha, the whole wave was coming, somebody picked up, wow, we put a little bit more fashion, and now everybody rides the bicycle, and I think it's very good for everybody.
Let's talk a bit about cycling, Brian, and take you back a few years to when your career started. You rode for a Belgian team sponsored by Roland, the company that makes keyboards, musical instruments. I was first going to ask, can you play the keyboard? Can you play any musical instruments?
That was my big dream, to play something, When I was a kid, I played a bit of piano, but everybody got a keyboard, but honestly, I never learned it. Later, I bought a guitar because I thought it would be cool to play a guitar, but no, play zero, unfortunately.
Was anyone in that team musical?
Not really. Nothing at all.
Who was in that team? Because Søren Lilleholt was another Danish rider, wasn't he, who went on and had some success in the Tour de France and so on, people might remember. But it was kind of was he in that team, or was he in his store a bit later on?
No, we started signing with Roland. Lousy contract, was like 10,000 euros a year, and my trainer, he was so pissed I signed for 10,000 euros a year, and luckily I convinced Bjarne Riis and Skiby to sign the same, so it was 3 Danish. Actually, we was 4 with Jan Østergaard also. He have a bike shop now in Luxembourg, so it was 4 Danish in that team. Then we got Herman Frisson, Ronnie van Holen, Johan Capio. It was a good team. Later the year after, Dietrich Thurau was coming. We won a few tour stages, so it was sort of a good team. Quite small budget, but I think we won a lot.
But in your first year, you had a really bad accident in a race.
Oh yes. The first year, my trainer told me, he said, when you do a race, we didn't have a lot of money, so he said, when you do a race, make sure you have prize money. It was always cash afterwards. A Carnaby race in Belgium would be like prize money for the first 30 riders. So it was always cash after you collected your money. And the first race, my mother went down to see my brother Kelvin. My trainer, Leif Mortensen, was world champion 69. And they went down to see me, and of course, having a guest from Denmark, I knew I have to pay the dinner in the evening, so I make sure I have some cash with me. So, cycling, when you really want to be in the breakaway, you always screw it. So attacking, and suddenly 25 guys is gone, I'm not in. Then we're coming a few minutes after, the first group, 170 riders, sprinting like mad dogs, for getting 18 pound, because it was 5 prizes left, So you're really doing silly race was in Vilvoorde in Belgium. You really go full speed ahead into that sprint to get 18 pound. So end of the story was I crashed. I smashed my head twice, broke my skull twice, and I don't remember anything, but my mother told me that they heard the ambulance. They picked up my mother, brother, and my trainer, and drove them to the hospital. But when they came in, I have it's a Catholic country, so there was a priest giving me the last oil because they said now I was dying. So of course my mother, she had sort of a shock, went unconscious also. And then they laid her in the bed, and they told her I was about to die. And luckily I waked up 3 days after. 3 days, but I stayed in the hospital for 5 weeks. I remember every day, Sean Kelly's wife Linda, she visited me almost every day. She passed by, to say hello. My sports director Guillaume Driesens, who actually started Colnago also with Ernesto, he was living next to me, so they came every morning, so to say good morning. But the first few weeks was big headache, as far I remember. And the funny thing was, after 5 weeks, I should leave the hospital, saying goodbye to the nurses, to the doctors. I was almost out of the hospital, and then the nurse was after me, Brian, you have to pay. I said, pay? Do I have to pay? Because you don't, in Denmark, you're paid by the government. And I didn't have any insurance. I went there to ask for the bill, and it's it was like 15,000 euros, and I made 10,000 a year. And my mother, she started to cry. So I was calling my boss, Mark Cavendish, the sports director, Guillaume Driesens. That was coming, we were sitting waiting, and I said, oh, what's going to happen now? I'm going to go to jail now because I can't pay my hospital bill, or what's going to happen? End of the day, they was just talking. They came back to me and said, Brian, we're going to pay it for you, but you have to sign another 3 years with the team and you can pay it back. And that's probably why I stayed 14 years in Belgium and I went home again.
So given the last rites, you make your mother faint not once, probably twice. First because she thought you'd died, and second because of the hospital bill. Lom Driesens was one of the sort of the giants of Belgium's director sportifs, wasn't he? I mean, quite an imposing, frightening man. And of course, Vilvoorde, where you had your accident in that kermesse, was where Sean Kelly was based, which is why Linda popped in to see you, I guess. But tell me a little bit about those early years of your career and what your fondest memories are from those early days, and particularly Lom Driesens as well.
Guillaume Driesens, Lomme, as I call him. There was a lot of books around him, but when I came, I didn't really know how famous he was, but he was sort of a legend in cycling because he worked, of course, with Freddy Martens, Ernesto Colnago was his old mechanic, so when he started Colnago, he sort of borrowed him the money, but he was like 110% cycling. He just lived for cycling. And I remember first training camp when we was pro, Skiby, Østergaard, Bjarne Riis and myself, who went to Sicily. And probably the first time, I remember our first training ride was 230 kilometers. That's quite long when you've never done it before. So let's say the last hour, you just think about food, running out of sugar, just getting dizzy, think about food, just need something to eat, having a Coke or something like that. Getting back to the hotel and just still in your mind, I need some food, I had to eat, Getting into the hotel, Driesens, he was standing there, looking us up when we was coming, sort of dividing us, you go to the restaurant, you go to your room. And most of us Danish were a bit too chubby, a bit too fat, and we wasn't allowed to eat. Nothing. And in the evening we got some salad. I mean, that was pretty strict diet those days, so when he was too fat. And it took a few years and then we were burning off the baby fat. Well, it was the hard way, trust me. But I really liked it, like the old-fashioned way of cycling. When Bjarne Riis lived in Luxembourg, coming with his fiancée, Mette, I remember Driesens going to Bjarne, just looking at him and said, Mr. Riis, did you bring your wife to work in Denmark? Bjarne said, no, you don't do it here either. Send her home. We don't like women at cycling races. I mean, that was pretty old school.
In terms of your racing days, I mean, what are your fondest memories from the time up to when you joined Telekom, I guess?
When I was young, going to Belgium, it was before the internet. I mean, living in Belgium, where we lived, we lived in Vilvoorde, moving back to Geel. But from Geel, you could not phone out of the city. You have to take your bicycle, go like 8 kilometers to Mol, then you have coins and you could call home, what you probably did once a week. It was quite isolated. You wouldn't know. I mean, for example, when there was a European Championship football, I didn't know the Danish won because there was zero information. You was riding your bike 8 hours a day. I could probably make more money as a bricklayer, as a professional cyclist. So I suppose we loved our job because otherwise you wouldn't kill yourself for that, for 18 pounds. But I remember when the big change was coming in cycling was when Bjarne Riis, I think first he was fifth in the Tour, then he became third. Then I was riding with Bjarne, we discussed the money, and I said, Bjarne, I mean, he didn't have a lot of money riding for Gewiss. I said, maybe we speak to Godefroot and negotiations, and then he came to T-Mobile, and I don't know if anybody really believed Bjarne Riis could win the Tour, but for sure he did. And then I started to realize, wow, now something happened in cycling, because people in Denmark started to follow, and after Bjarne won in Paris, we flew back to Copenhagen in a private jet, and I was with him also, and I said, wow, Bjarne, now it's fine, now we've got new friends, because you always know in cycling when rich people start to come, famous people, politicians coming, then it's because things are going good.
How do you feel about your career now? Well, let's have lunch first. Thank you very much.
How nice is that?
That looks good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, cool.
Is that the minced beef one? That one?
Yeah, that's
thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
Enjoy.
Looks good, eh?
Oh, fantastic. I'm just getting hungry now. Beautiful.
Whoever you are, whatever you ride, whatever the reason, Rapha exists to improve your ride with the finest kit, inspiring stories and vibrant clubhouses and communities all over the world.
Thanks to Rapha for sponsoring the cycling podcast all year, and as Christmas approaches, it's time to start thinking about whether you can take part in the festive 500. It's a yearly tradition now, set up by Rapha to challenge riders to pedal 500 kilometres in the 8 days between Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. Find out more at rapha.cc/festive 500. There are lots of tips and encouragement for going the distance too. Now, I've been challenged by Rapha's Ian Fleck to take on the Festive 500, and I've done the maths, and I've looked at the various commitments I have over Christmas, a lot of which involves eating sausage rolls and chocolates, unfortunately. Well, not unfortunately, fortunately. But I'm going to have a crack at it. I don't think I can get close to the full 500, but I'm going to see if I can get over halfway. I'll be quite happy with that, but maybe you can go further. There's a bit of background on how this all came to be. Back in 2009, Rapha product designer and father of the Festive 500, Graham Rayburn, challenged himself to ride 1,000 kilometres over the Christmas holiday. That was more than enough to realise that 500 kilometres would have sufficed. So since then, it's become a custom for the Rapha staff and anyone else who wants to have a go to try and squeeze in 500 kilometres over the festive period. In its first year, just 94 completed the distance. Last year, over 80,000 took part, with 17,000 going the full distance. As I said, I'll give it my best shot. I think 500 kilometres, probably a bit too much for me, but like I said, well, let's see. I'll probably tweet about it, and you can follow my progress at Lionel Birnie on Twitter, and let's see if I can bust 250 kilometres before I bust the belt buckle on my trousers. What did you make of the pie, Brian?
Honestly, it was absolutely fantastic. Like we talking about before, I'm not really into food, haute cuisine, stuff like that. Michelin stars, I just don't have it. I think some people will love it, I don't. But for me, that's really proper food, I really love it.
Well, you've made short work of it. It's all gone. That was you had the steak pie with the onion gravy and the champ mash, which is the Irish mash with cheese and a bit of spring onion in. I had a minced beef pie, very nice. But one thing about London pie culture that you may not know is that traditionally in the East End of London, where the old pie and mash shops were, they'd serve the pie with a white sauce, a parsley kind of liquor, they call it. So slightly, this is a slightly kind of Soho version of London pie and mash, but very nice nonetheless.
It's amazing you have stuff like that. I mean, normally, when I get hungry, I would normally buy a packet of like short breaks and just eat it for lunch. But I didn't really know you just could go here in Soho, like having stuff like that. So I can promise you it's not the last time I've been here.
You were talking there about Bjarne Riis, Brian, an old teammate of yours. You were in that Telekom T-Mobile team in '96 when he won the Tour de France, weren't you?
Yes, I remember the meeting with Godefroot, the whole team with Sabel, Ulrich, having the first meeting. Everybody had sort of a role, going for the sprints for Sabel, and with Ulrich, he was in for the last moment. I think that was elected just the last week because he was going good in Tour de Suisse. And then Bjarne, we hope he could make top 10. Godefroot did not really mention him. And I remember when the meeting was almost done, and Godefroot, he said, any questions? Bjarne, who's not a great talker, he didn't say a lot. Suddenly he stand up, I have something to say. And I said, wow, you're going to talk now? And he's standing up and he said, guys, I believe I can win the Tour de France. And I saw he didn't say that. And I looked at Sabel, the Germans are like that, just like shaking their heads like what he's saying, bloody fool. And he said, sort of what Brian and Christian Hen next to me the whole race, and then I can win, we give him shelter in the crosswind and blah blah blah. And I said, oh Christ, I'm gonna sit with Bjarne Riis, we started up in Holland, crosswind. Always staying around Bjarne, because he was, of course, the captain. So honestly, I think I spent... my ambition was, of course, to win a stage also, and it was hard for me because I have to drag Bjarne around in Holland the first week, getting into the mountains. And I think the first week I really crossed my finger. I hope he would break his collarbone getting out so I could go my own chance. But, it didn't happen.
I think it's 10 years since you basically went public and admitted that you'd been part of that doping culture at that time in the mid to late 90s, and it obviously went on beyond that. But how now you look back at Bjarne Riis's win and your part in that whole culture, how do you feel about your own career?
Let's start it with the whole doping story. I wrote a book. I quit cycling. I thought I didn't really know what to do. I thought I'm going to write a book. I couldn't write really, but I called an editor. I said, can I write a book? He said, yes, go ahead. So actually it's just writing line, the way you're talking, So, but the chapter about those days was very big in Denmark, doping. Everybody was talking about doping, what was going on. And to write a book and not talk about doping would be very strange. I think writing the book took me 1 week. It was quite easy. But the chapter about doping was very difficult. I really think I wrote it 10 times. So end of the day, my friend Rasmus Bæk from a Danish paper called Journalist Politikken, he said, you can't lie in a book. It's always come out if you're lying. So be honest. So I tried to be honest that I could do. I said I did something forbidden. I took something forbidden. I didn't exactly say what. I thought I can't really screw my old teammates. So I said I did something. That was 2002. The book came out and everything exploded around me. I thought looking out my window with the journalist, it was just going crazy because I admitted doping in 2002. I really thought I have to move papers, writing, send him to Sweden, and it wasn't funny. For about 1 week, 2 weeks, and suddenly everything changed. Journalists say at least he was honest because they knew it anyway. Yeah? They knew what happened. So suddenly I could speak about it in the public, what happened. And for sure, the press left me alone. And then I was chasing the guys who didn't admit. So everything, the big next wave, I think was 2006 or 11. I was then sports director. Then the whole T-Mobile, Sabel, Aldag, Riis admitted they did it also, and what they did also came out, So what happened then, honestly, somebody talking about now what's happened 20 years ago, I think it's a bit silly. I think everybody was around. I think everybody knew something. Somebody did a lot, somebody did a little. It's hard to explain. 20 years ago, everybody would smoke inside in the restaurant also. Nowadays it seems so silly. You think, why would you smoke inside? Our sports director going to, when we was driving down to Côte d'Azur, we know when it was close to Côte d'Azur, he need new cigarettes versus rats because then he'd been smoking one packet of Chitan, 20 cigarettes in the car, So it's just happened then, and it's really hard to say why nobody stopped it before.
The thing is though, Brian, smoking wasn't forbidden. It was permitted, and then it was banned, and then people stopped. And there's no similar line. In the UK that happened, I think, on the weekend the tour started here in London in 2007 was the first weekend of the smoking ban. But there was no such line in cycling, was there? Where it was banned when you were racing, and it's banned now. But there hasn't been a solid line in the sand where the culture has changed. We've had to trust that the culture has changed gradually, because obviously people from your era, some are working in the media, some are working in current teams as sports directors. So I suppose there is a relevance to it now to kind of understand what went on in those days and sort of guard against those kind of cultures springing up again.
I think culture like that, the cultures just have to be changed, and it doesn't happen overnight. I can't imagine how it happen overnight. But the young kids nowadays, I think it's not even a topic anymore. And I think first of all, to solve a problem, you have to realize there was a problem. And back then, you can say, okay, it was not forbidden to smoke, but doping, drugs was forbidden, but also accepted. Nobody would really stop you. And if somebody say from that generation, I would say even journalists, sports directors, managers, writers who didn't know anything, they're probably full of bullshit. Of course, everybody knew something. Somebody probably took a lot and somebody very little. You can say a lot of guys say probably they race clean, but probably most riders probably tried a cortisone tablets, but it was really nothing. I don't even know if it was helping, but everybody knew a little bit, Of course, you still have to be a good cyclist to win a race, but it was just another generation. And I think there was the scandal. First was Festina scandal, was not nice. And then I remember I said, what's going on here in cycling? It's just wrong. And later I think with Operation Puerto, with the blood thing, was very nasty also. And I think step by step people got their lesson, and starting up HTC with Bob Stapleton, he really said now we're going to make a new team, and somebody tested positive or you don't stop it, you lose your job. I'm going to sue you into hell. And I still say those days, people would say also with HTC days, when we said we make it, at least we were trying good as possible to make a clean team. They say, they did it, they're full of bullshit because they don't, they're still cheating. But until that day, back in, I think we started 2007-8 with Bob Stapleton, I still said, if somebody might say we knew something or we didn't do everything to stop it, I would leave cycling the same second. Like Aldag said, I was admitting doping. Aldag said, ahead of 5 million people, that's gonna be nothing in this team here, I promise you. Then I'll leave him cycling forever also. And in cycling, you have a secret. It lasts for maximum 5 years. It's not fun to have a secret if you can't tell it to anybody. You know what I mean? So all secrets coming out. We saw that with the history of cortisone, testosterone, blood doping, everything coming out. But still today, till today, I say one of the first clean team with Highroad.
Just lastly on your career, did you feel resentful that you had to do the things you did, and what do you consider to be the worst thing you did?
Keep in mind when you did something, like say cortisone tablet or something, you could buy in a normal drugstore, pharmacia. You could buy cortisone tablets, eat it in the race, what you would maybe do 5 times a year. My generation, we did 130 races a year. 5 times you would take a tablet. I remember I asked my doctor home, I say, the tablets here, is dangerous or what happening? He looked at it, he said, that you can eat every day rest of your life, it doesn't hurt you because it's nothing. I'm not even sure if it was helping. First 3-4 years, I was not even close to do anything forbidden. Then you hear somebody training with somebody, they say, okay, try a tablet in the race. Nobody really forced me to it. I was absolutely zero pressure to do anything because with my sports directors, they never mentioned anything like that. So you're talking to somebody, your mates, are saying, try to eat a tablet, you try it, and then actually it's doping because you're trying, So later, the last year of my career, I tried EPO also. It probably was helping, but I suppose a lot of riders did it, so it didn't help so much because so many did it.
Did you worry about the health impacts? Because obviously, a little later on, you were diagnosed with cancer after you'd retired. I mean, did anyone say, was there any kind of link, either from the people in the medical profession saying to you, what have you done? Or in your own mind, were you thinking, I wonder if I've created a problem here?
No, because my Danish doctor, when I did something, I always asked him for his advice. I mean, again, you did 100. Later in the career was just 100 races a year. But it was not too many times you did it a year. I mean, you still was training 300 days a year those days. And you did it, so you really did not feel it was a big part of your career when you did something. And you didn't really not consider that you did something forbidden. It was like your vitamins, It was never something you really planned, next race I'm going to do like that. Most of the races you really did without anything. And then I got cancer later, and that it could be of the cortisone tablets or something. It did never cross my mind, because when you're about to die, what I actually was, you doesn't really think about it that way. But somebody was always so kind to mention it to me, But with cancer, is 1 out of 3 people getting it. So it could have been, but it wouldn't help a lot. It was a shitty situation.
Yeah, I mean, what was that like? I mean, you were working in cycling at the time, weren't you?
Yes, I was a sports director, and what was sort of a strange story, because I went 5 years in a row. I asked my doctor after some visit to the toilet. I saw some sort of blood, and I asked it for many years. Belgian doctors, Danish doctors, what it was, and they didn't know nothing. They said, One day I thought like 2004 was a little bit more. I just gave up going to a normal doctor. I went to a specialist myself, and it took him less than 30 seconds when he checked my bottom and say you got a colon cancer and it doesn't look very good. So that was like absolutely the hardest time of my life. It's take 2 weeks. You have the X-rays, the blood controls, everything, and you realize with colon cancer back in 2004 you would have 47% to survive, and that was not a big number. So you're going 2 weeks thinking about this. In a few years, maybe 1 year, it's a bigger chance you're dead than alive, and that's make you think about life. And was tough, was really tough. I mean, that make the hardest race I've done in my life make like a holiday, I was nothing, because I just became daddy, like my son was 8 months, so I felt so guilty, I have to die from my son, so it was very, very hard period. I did some note. Actually wrote a book about it, because my friend Peter Peel, a journalist, he said do some notes. Every day I was writing down, episodes, something happened. 5 years after I read them, a friend asked, we do a book about it. I did not feel like talking about it because it was so hard. I thought like I'm never going to talk about it again. And I look at the notes, and I was writing down when I'm going to die, what was the best thing about life. And I have to do like a list of my favorite bikes, my favorite bands, favorite cars, blah, blah, blah. And I have the list saying, best thing about life, what I'm gonna miss when I die. I had the list. And I remember the top 3 was the best thing I did, like every Wednesday home. Me and my neighbors, we running 10 kilometers and drinking coffee afterwards. I have a cup of tea or beer, whatsoever. I really love it. The next thing was just when I'm home Saturday, I always sleep to 10. I'm staying long in bed, Best thing in life, with the family, have coffee in your bed, and it's just fantastic. And best thing I did, number 1 on the list, was like going to the Royal Garden with my son, feeding the birds. And it's really nothing, but when you read that list 5 years after, it's funny, because you realize the best thing in life costs no money. Not a bloody dime, so everything you love in life costs nothing, so you have to enjoy it. And I think of that account, people who was very sick of cancer, because when I'm home I always visit cancer people once a month in the hospital. I don't like it because it's a hard job also to speak to people who have to die, to speak to somebody who really has to leave. But you have to do it also to support people a little bit. But everybody say the same about life, the stuff you really love in life costs nothing. So like you say, enjoy life. And I think like after what I can say, it maybe sound like a cliche, but really, having the cancer was the best thing happened in my life, because after you get so humble and every morning you wake up, you're so happy. Just know you're not sick.
And on your list of best things to do, if you carried that list down, what number would sitting in a team car in the Tour de France be?
Actually, it was not in top 10. It would be like 10 or 11, stuff like that. I done it after I quit cycling. I almost did it every year. I think I did 20 Tour de France. But I think my job I have as a sports director is sort of a hobby also. I wouldn't consider, don't tell it to my boss please, but it's not really a job, because every day I go into the Tour de France stage or Tour of Catalonia, whatever you're doing, I feel like I really go to a holiday. It's really nice. We talked about doping before. Sometimes I say, asking the journalists, can we talk a little bit about doping? Nobody talk about doping anymore. Keep in mind, a few years back, everybody was talking about doping. Every Christians, they were accusing us, everything. I mean, most of it was lies. There was crazy stories about what we did. I mean, it wasn't too crazy, It was very strange, but now nobody asks about anything about doping. I think you're the first guy asking me for 4 years about doping, so we actually forgot it.
Well, I'm paying for lunch, Brian, so I'm allowed to.
No, but it seems like even journalists, the young generation of journalists, they just no interest. Maybe it's because it doesn't send any papers anymore. It's not a big story anymore. I mean, nowadays I think people can even admit without losing their job. I mean, 10 years back you admit you could be pretty sure you lost your job also.
The Cycling Podcast is supported by Science in Sport. Science in Sport, fueled by science.
Thank you to Science in Sport for sponsoring the Cycling Podcast. There's still a 20% discount code for listeners of the Cycling Podcast if you want to get 20% off all Science in Sport products, energy bars, gels, powders. Go to scienceinsport.com, and when you reach the checkout, type in CPAUG20, CPAUG20, and you'll get 20% off your bill. You mentioned your boss, Patrick Lefevre. It's been a tough year for him, hasn't it? Because there's been a cloud hanging over the Quick-Step team. Looked in the middle of the year like the team might not continue, but everything's okay. Marcel Kittel's moving on, so losing a big sprinter. But Patrick seems to have this skill of every time a big rider leaves, there's somebody already coming up to replace, or he manages to find riders and get more out of them sometimes than they've achieved at other teams. I mean, Kittel goes, Gaviria looks like he's ready to step in, and of course Kittel came in after Mark Cavendish had left. It's he doesn't struggle to create good teams, does he? Why is that?
That's a good question. I think for sure Patrick is probably one of the smartest managers in cycling, no doubt about that. I think a part of his philosophy is like he never really worked with superstars. Cavendish
won't like that.
No, but Cav, he came after Sky. I mean, Cav wasn't really happy with Sky. He wanted to leave also, and he didn't have he did have a good year with Sky, of course, but he wanted to go back, have a better lead out, and so on. And like he always have with his team, he always have 15, 16, maybe sometimes even 17 riders is winning. But like these real superstars, like now we talk about Froome now, or probably one of the biggest, Sagan also. But I think we're always having 4 or 5 riders who can win, like say Niki Terpstra. We did have Matteo Trentin. Always good riders who actually could make it in the final of Paris-Roubaix, Tour de Flanders. Of course, it was a classic team with more captains.
Is Patrick quite a frightening guy? I mean, he's quite intimidating, but he can't frighten his staff members, I guess, to get the best out of them.
From outside, he can see a little bit not too friendly. He's a bit hard, but when you know him, learn to know him. When I went to Quick-Step, I remember I always noticed his staff. Sonniers, mechanic. He always kept the same staff members. And I sort of understood he's gonna be a good man. A guy who never sacked people. His people is extremely loyal, so he's gonna be a good boss. He's sort of guy, when you call him, he always pick up his telephone 24 hours. If you're busy in a meeting, whatever, what he have a lot, he always call you back after the meeting. He know everything what's going on in the team. Everything you're doing, he know about it. He's a fantastic person. I think he became manager back in 79. He was a cyclist, must have been for Mark Cavendish, a small Belgian team. Patrick was complaining to the boss about the structure in the team. The boss said to Patrick, if you're so smart, you do it yourself. Yes, he said. He quit cycling, he became sports director. And somebody being sports director since 79, you probably have a few skills.
What do you think your skills are, Brian, when it comes to... You seem very calm. Nothing seems... I've never seen you in a temper. I've never seen you lose your temper, but maybe you do behind closed doors. I don't know.
I think I have a temper, like I always try to look at my old bosses, and I just like bosses who doesn't lose their temper. I think you have to stay calm. I think when you lose your temper, I think you lose sort of respect. For sure he doesn't respect people when you're yelling, and for sure they lose respect to you. I never really saw one of my best bosses was Walter Godefroot. Whatever happened, he always stayed calm. Of course, I know I could never be Walter Godefroot because he was one of the best managers ever. So I'm trying hard, but I remember going to Godefroot when I went to T-Mobile and I said, Valda, I was riding for you for 5 years or 6 years, whatever. But you never really spoke to me. You never say hello to my wife. You always ignored her. She was actually afraid of him. So how could that be? And Valda, he just looked at me, He was almost smiling. He said, Brian, I was your boss. If I want to be a good boss, I keep people like 1 meter away. Because sooner or later I have to sack you. I have to sack everybody. And if you start to have sort of relationship, maybe I'm going to start to think with my heart and not with my head. So no, I keep everybody, all my employees like 1 meter away, yeah. And about your wife, maybe she was nice, I can't tell. But for sure, the day I sack her, we drink coffee with her, the day I'm gonna sack you, she's gonna call me in the evening and cry, because you probably just have a baby or bought a new house. And I say, Brian, do as you want to. And to be honest with you, I was a nice guy 30 years ago, he said, but it made me too many enemies.
Interesting. I mean, but you must have an interest in your riders, personal lives, because, if they're having trouble with their wives or their families or girlfriends or any kind of issue, moving house, I don't know, any kind of things that go on in normal life, that could affect them out on the road. I mean, cycling is unusual in the sense that so much of the time is spent away from home. It's not like a football match where you maybe go away for 1 night, 2 nights perhaps. Riders going off to the Tour de France for 3 weeks knowing that they might not have a lot of contact with their family for that time, you've kind of got to get a personal relationship with them, haven't you?
Sort of. Yeah, like I said before, for sure I could never be Godefroot because there's only be one Godefroot. With the riders now it's different, of course. All sports directors are working with 4 or 5 riders, we're calling them. Of course, if somebody have let's say it's a daddy, we had a rider where the daddy was very sick, of course it's going to have a certain influence on his performance, and we look after them. We're calling them, luckily not cycling ain't anymore like it was 20 or 30 years ago, so we're really looking after the riders. We have our managers meeting like most teams. We discuss all riders, let's say a half an hour. How do they perform when they start to stress in the finals? How can we make them better? So no, we follow all riders very, very closely now. We have young pros. We try to find them a good spot to live. Let's say we need like role models, like we did have Dan Martin, we have Gilbert, If they can hang out with the riders like that, we sort of know they're going to learn it. Just
away from cycling, I mean, I wanted to ask you about your political interests in Copenhagen because you're part of the city's council. Is that something that you want to continue? I mean, how did that come about? What's the reason for being interested in sort of political life and civic life back in Copenhagen?
It started like 5 years ago. I was complaining about some buildings. Frederiksberg, where I'm living, there was building something and I didn't really like it. And I think it was, when I looked at it, my eyes was bleeding. So I wrote the mayor a few letters about it to complain, and one day he called me for a meeting. We discussed it, and he sort of said, Brian, if you're so bloody smart, why don't you go for the election? I said, okay, then I do. And I didn't know really what to expect, and then I was elected, and I said, here we go. And that happened like 4.5 years ago, now it's 4 years ago. It was a long learning process, and I realized I knew nothing about politics, about the city, but it's a bit of learning, and I was spent 4 years reading, meetings when I'm home. It's quite interesting. And with the election, it was a big honor. I think it was a big honor. I think one of the best things happened, I was most proud of without knowing afterwards, was probably when I was elected for the city council. And on the other hand, if you're not elected, next time now, 21st of November, I have some more free time.
What is it you get from it? Because I guess it's taking care of the environment, taking care of the city around you.
First of all, when you get elected, you have a certain influence on your city. I remember saying to the mayor, I'm not a really political person. I'm not going to stand up here, like just to say something. I mean, it's not. I don't like it. So not really a political person with ambitions to get into the government, stuff like that. But the mayor said, Brian, you took your time to write me some letters to complain, and if you care about your city, how it looked like, how the street is, then you care about politics, and that's also politics. And that was like he sort of convinced me to get in, and that's actually how it happened. And still, like I think I like and I have maybe little, but just a little influence on the city.
There's an awful lot of politics around at the moment. Here in the UK, we're obsessed with Brexit. America has Donald Trump. I mean, what are your political leanings and what are your ideas?
About Brexit, of course, I think that was a blow, a surprise for everybody, wasn't it? I mean, about Trump, there's not reason to talk too much about him. I mean, that's again very, very strange story. I think it's sort of unexpected. That happened, but But on that account, I wouldn't really write long letters in the papers about it or getting up on the big interviews, because I think even home in Denmark, talking too much about politics, I think the people in Denmark, they sort of think about me like as a sports director from sport. And I think it would be quite dangerous for me to get too vocal in politics in Denmark. I think it would be hard for people to see now is a sports director or politician. So the day I stop as a sports director, I probably go all in. But until that day, I talk a little as possible about it. Of course, I have my cases, like we call it in Denmark. I go for school uniforms. I'm against election posters in the city on the trees. I don't like it. So I'm probably the only one of the politicians that doesn't have the ugly posters.
Because they blow off the trees and off the walls and they litter the streets, I guess.
They make pollution, they have to burn them afterwards, that cost a fortune. I think the money we could give to people who really need it and not for that ugly poster. So I think it's good reasons not to have the posters. And I think in a few years they're going to disappear, everybody, because everybody going to have their campaigns, probably on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram.
Just lastly then, on back to cycling, how long do you think you'll carry on? I mean, can you see a point where you'll say, I've had enough of the long days in the car? Because I mean, it's a tiring job, isn't it? I mean, it's not the same as riding, of course, but you've got responsibility from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, and the Grand Tours must really get quite tiring, no?
Last time I knew what I should do the year after for living was when I was a bricklayer. Was in '84. Then I knew next year I'd be bricklayer again. And that thought was not really, it wasn't my dream. So since '86, I never had a clue what I'd do the year after. Never. So sort of I decided not to decide anything, because everything I'm deciding is always going another direction. And when I'm gonna quit as a sports director, I think it's one of the best jobs you can have in the world, being sports director, because it's your hobby and it's your dream, and it's a big honor to work with riders like Rigo, Cavendish, Greipel, Kittel, Matteo Trentin, Stibar, and I really feel honored that I had the chance to work with them. And I feel like a really lucky man. And sooner or later, everything was starting in life, that's going to stop also. And for sure, sooner or later, Patrick going to tell me we don't have a sponsor or you're sacked, and then I stop. Simple as that. And with the job, you never have to be romantic with your job. When I'm going to stop one day, I'll just be happy with the thing I saw in cycling, and the honor was to work with the great champions.
Just lastly, you mentioned Wigo there, Bradley Wiggins. You saw him yesterday here in London. You worked with him for only 1 year as a sports director. Was that he joined HTC or Team Columbia as they were, Highroad, I think, possibly started. That was the year you had 3 different names, I think, in 2008. Is that right?
Yes, I think we started as Highroad and then we became Columbia or something like that with the blue jerseys. Unfortunately, we just had Rigo 1 year. I really liked him. I was getting really good along with Rigo, like with Cav. Of course, with Cav was always something special. And from the beginning, with me and Cav, I was probably from the start we probably just had the same taste of music. I mean, I don't think I was any better sports director than others, to be honest. And with Rigo, he is just a charming man also. He's just great fun to work with. I remember Rolf Aldag, my colleague, said he can win the Tour. I didn't really believe him. But sort of Rolf Aldag started to convince you, losing some weight, special training, he could win the Tour. And unfortunately, then he left to Garmin, and that's life.
Well, then he left Garmin and went to Sky. I mean, it was like musical chairs for Wiggo at the time, wasn't it? He moved on every year. What do you think of Team Sky? Because Quick-Step and Team Sky are kind of, I wouldn't say equals, because Sky have got a huge budget. Quick-Step, have been around such a long time, and Patrick Lefevre has got so much, knowledge and know-how about how the sport works. Team Sky are kind of the new kids on the block. Do you sort of look across at their bus and look across at how they do things and think, what do you think of them? They've come in and they've kind of, have they changed things to any great extent, or have they just, benefited from having quite a lot of money to spend?
I think Sky got the best team in the world. I think it's a very nice team. I like the riders, they got some good talents there, and getting down with Chris Froome is just the best GC rider in the world, no discussion. He's just the best, and of course he got also the best support with Kwiatkowski and the guys, so it's a very, very nice team. And so on the other hand, I'm also a little bit jealous, I suppose, because they got so much money. They're never short of anything. They have a long-term contract, so they're probably a bit of jealousy also, I have to admit. But they got a damn good team, and it's good looking. And of course, they have the Brailsford. I consider him a bit of a character also, but I'm not too impressed with him.
Do you get on with him okay?
Nah, I never really talked to him.
Why is that?
I just think like all the comments he have, if they're having they say the last time trial Froome he won was last year. Always some comments about let's say, we spoke to NASA about the bikes, like always silly stuff like that. Always speaking to NASA or something when it is, it's a good story also, of course. I mean, I suppose the press is buying it, so he's a very smart guy, no doubt about it. But I know my boss would never talk anything like that. So next day, Froome, he crashed, who did you speak to now? NASA again, it's slippery going down. So he pulling up a good show. It's probably good for the press. For people inside cycling, is a bit of a joke.
You're too old school, Brian.
Probably, unfortunately. Maybe I should stop.
Not just yet, but our time has come to an end. Our lunch is finished, and thank you very much for joining me.
It was fantastic. It was a pleasure. Thank you.